The stars looked different from the bridge of the UES Defiance. Captain Jake Morrison stood near the main viewing screen, watching the distant lights that marked the edge of known space. His ship was 3 months into a survey mission, mapping new systems and looking for resources that Earth might need someday. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Lisa Park from her communication station. The young officer had been with the crew for 2 years, and Jake trusted her instincts. "It's coming from the Cathari system, about 6 light years from here." Jake walked over to her station. "What kind of signal?" Lisa frowned at her instruments. "It's a distress call, but it's not following any standard format. The computer is having trouble translating it." Dr. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her science station. She was the ship's expert on alien biology and had studied dozens of species during her career. "The Cathari are peaceful people. They've been part of the Galactic Coalition for centuries. They make beautiful art from living crystals. Why would they be sending distress calls?" Jake asked. The answer came 30 minutes later when the ship's computer finally decoded the messages. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. The Cathari homeworld was dying. Some kind of infection was spreading through their planet, destroying their cities and killing their people. Jake read the messages with growing concern. Families were saying goodbye to loved ones. Parents were recording final messages for children who lived on other worlds. The most heartbreaking were from young Cathari, asking why no help was coming, why the galaxy had gone quiet when they called for aid. "How long do they have?" Jake asked Dr. Rodriguez. Amy studied the data streaming in from Cathari space. "According to these readings, the infection is spreading through their planet's crystal network. Their whole civilization is built on living crystal formations. If this continues, they have maybe 3 weeks before total collapse." Jake made his decision quickly. "Set course for the Cathari system, maximum speed." "Sir, shouldn't we contact the Coalition first?" asked Ben Hayes, the ship's tactical officer. "This might be some kind of restricted situation." "We'll contact them on the way," Jake replied. "But we're not waiting for permission to answer a distress call." The journey to Cathari space took 18 hours at maximum warp. During that time, Jake tried repeatedly to reach Coalition headquarters. When he finally got through, the response chilled him to the bone. Administrator Vex 9 appeared on the screen, his insect-like features showing no emotion. "Captain Morrison, you are approaching a restricted zone. The Cathari situation has been evaluated by Coalition economic analysts." "What do you mean, evaluated?" Jake demanded. "The cost of evacuating the Cathari population exceeds their projected future economic contribution to Coalition interests. The decision has been made to observe and document their extinction for scientific purposes." Jake stared at the screen in disbelief. "You're just going to watch them die?" "The Coalition operates on logical principles, Captain. Resources must be allocated efficiently. The Cathari have had a good run, but all species eventually face extinction. We will preserve their cultural achievements for future study." "What about the people? The children?" "Regrettable but unavoidable. You are ordered to withdraw from Cathari space immediately. This matter does not concern humanity." The transmission ended, leaving Jake staring at a blank screen. Around the bridge, his crew sat in stunned silence. Lisa Park was the first to speak. "They can't be serious. There are 300 million people down there." Dr. Rodriguez pulled up images of Cathari cities on her screen. The alien architecture was breathtaking, with towers of living crystal that grew like trees toward the sky. But in the recent pictures, the crystals were turning black, crumbling as the infection spread. "The Cathari build everything from biocrystals," Amy explained. "Their homes, their ships, their technology. It's all alive in a way we don't fully understand. This infection is like a cancer that's eating their entire civilization." Ben Hayes checked his tactical displays. "Captain, I'm showing several Coalition ships on the system's edge. They're just sitting there watching." Jake felt sick. The great Galactic Coalition, with all its advanced technology and vast resources, was content to watch an entire species die because saving them wouldn't be profitable. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth, only 8 years old. and imagined her crying for help while powerful strangers decided her life wasn't worth the cost of helping. "Take us into the system," he ordered. "Sir, the coalition ships might try to stop us," Ben warned. "Let them try." The Defiance entered Cathari space unopposed. The coalition vessels tracked them, but made no move to interfere. Jake supposed they were curious to see what the humans would do. What they found broke their hearts. Velthara, the Cathari homeworld, was a planet of incredible beauty turned into a nightmare. The great crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were collapsing. Black veins of infection spread across continents like a plague, turning the living crystal formations into dead, crumbling stone. Millions of Cathari had gathered at spaceports hoping for rescue that would never come. Their ships were small, designed for short trips between their crystal cities, not for interstellar evacuation. They had nowhere to go and no way to get there. "My God," whispered Lisa Park as she watched the feeds from the planet's surface. "Look at them all." The Cathari were a beautiful people, tall and graceful with skin that looked like polished gemstone. They moved with fluid elegance, even in their desperation. Jake watched families huddled together in refugee camps, their natural luminescence dim with fear and despair. "Captain," came a voice from the planet's surface. The universal translator made it sound mechanical, but Jake could hear the emotion underneath. "I am Sha'athan, speaker for the Cathari people. Are you here to help us?" Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all young, like him, representing a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. They had one ship, a crew of 200, and no authority to make promises on behalf of humanity. But they were here, and that had to count for something. "Yes," Jake said into the communicator. "We're here to help. My name is Captain Jake Morrison, of the United Earthship Defiance. Tell me what you need." For the first time in weeks, Sha'athan's voice carried a note of hope. "We need everything, Captain Morrison. But most of all, we need time. Time to evacuate our people before our world dies completely." Jake Morrison looked at the massive scope of the disaster and the tiny size of his ship. 300 million people needed rescue, and he had room for maybe 1,000 at most. The coalition had already decided these people weren't worth saving. But Jake Morrison wasn't part of the coalition. He was human, and humans had different ideas about what made a life worth saving. The news hit Earth like a thunderbolt. Within hours of Captain Morrison's first transmission, every major network was running the story. Images of the dying Cathari world filled screens across human space, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. President Maria Santos was in the middle of a budget meeting when her chief of staff burst into the room. "Madam President, you need to see this right now." The footage was heartbreaking. Cathari families gathered around their children, their crystal-like skin flickering with dim light as their world crumbled around them. The translator software struggled to convert their musical language, but the meaning was clear in their gestures and expressions. They were scared, desperate, and completely alone. "Where is the coalition?" President Santos asked. "According to our sources, they've written the Cathari off as economically unviable. They're treating this like a natural disaster, something to study rather than prevent." Maria Santos had been president for 3 years, and she had never felt more ashamed of the galaxy her species had joined. "Get me Admiral Thompson. Get me the emergency assembly. Get me every ship captain who can fly and every transport that can carry people. Ma'am, we're talking about 300 million refugees. We don't have the ships or the resources for an operation this size." "Then we'll find them," she said firmly, "because that's what humans do." The emergency assembly session lasted 14 hours. Representatives from every human colony and outpost argued, debated, and planned. The numbers were staggering. Earth's entire merchant fleet could maybe transport 50,000 people at once. It would take hundreds of trips to evacuate everyone, and they had weeks at most. But something remarkable happened during those 14 hours. Nobody suggested giving up. Nobody argued that the cost was too high or that the Cathari weren't their responsibility. Instead, they argued about who would get to help first. Colony Governor Linda Shaw stood up during the 10th hour of debate. My people are miners and farmers. We don't have much, but we have empty worlds where the Cathari can settle. Send them to us. Captain Danny Lee of the cargo hauler Phoenix Rising transmitted from deep space. My ship can carry 5,000 people if we strip out the cargo holds. Give me coordinates and I'll be there in 36 hours. Captain Kelly Wright of the New Horizon joined the conversation minutes later. Same here. My crew is ready to leave now. Dr. Nathan Cross, commanding the medical vessel Sanctuary, offered his ship despite having no military protection. Those people need medical attention. We're coming whether we have an escort or not. Admiral Claire Thompson coordinated the growing fleet from Earth's orbital headquarters. She was a career military officer who had fought in the border wars, but she had never managed anything like this. Civilian cargo ships were volunteering faster than she could process them. Colony worlds were offering to take refugees. The entire human economy was pivoting toward one goal. Tony Martinez, chief engineer of the industrial complex on Titan, called in with an idea. We can retrofit cargo containers with life support systems. Basic, but functional. If we work around the clock, we can have conversion kits ready in 48 hours. How many people could we transport that way? Admiral Thompson asked. If every ship in our merchant fleet carries maximum capacity, maybe 200,000 per trip. It still wasn't enough, but it was a start. On Earth, the response from ordinary citizens was overwhelming. Teacher Susan Blake organized her students to collect supplies for refugee families. They gathered clothes, toys, and food with the determination of children who had seen other children in need. Factory worker Pete Johnson met with union leaders across the industrial sector. We need to retool everything: food processing, clothing, manufacture, temporary housing. These people are going to need everything when they get here. What about our contracts? Asked union boss Sarah Kim. We've got obligations to fulfill. Pete looked at her like she was crazy. Sarah, there are kids dying out there. Kids who look different from ours but who cry the same tears. You really think our contracts matter more than that? Within 6 hours, every major industrial union on Earth had voted to redirect production toward refugee relief. The economic disruption would cost billions, but nobody seemed to care. The response wasn't limited to Earth. Human colonies throughout space began preparing for refugees. New Detroit, a mining world with a harsh climate, started building temporary shelters. The agricultural colonies started increasing food production. Even the smallest outposts offered what little space they had. Captain Morrison watched the mobilization from his position near Velthara. The Cathari had been monitoring human communications, and Shathan could barely believe what he was hearing. Captain Morrison, our sensors show dozens of your ships heading this way. Your people are really coming? More than dozens, Jake replied. Every ship that can fly, every person who can help, we're going to get your people out of there. But why? Shathan asked. Our species barely know each other. We have nothing to offer in return. Your coalition membership might be at risk. Jake thought about that question for a long time. Why were humans doing this when no other species would? Why were they willing to risk everything for strangers? Because you asked for help, he finally said. Because you're scared and alone and in danger. Where I come from, those are the only reasons we need. The first human relief ships began arriving 3 days later. Captain Danny Lee's Phoenix Rising was first, followed by Kelly Wright's New Horizon. Dr. Cross brought the Sanctuary with its expanded medical facilities. One by one, human vessels dropped out of warp around Velthara. The Cathari couldn't believe what they were seeing. Each ship was small compared to coalition vessels, but there were so many of them. And they kept coming. Tony Martinez had been as good as his word. The cargo containers had been converted into basic living quarters. They weren't comfortable, but they were safe and functional. Families could stay together, and there was room for personal belongings and cultural treasures. The evacuation began immediately. Cathari families were processed through the spaceports as quickly as possible. Human crew members worked alongside Cathari volunteers, using translation software and hand gestures to communicate. Language barriers couldn't stop the universal language of people helping people, but the Coalition wasn't happy about human interference. Commander Zielka of the Coalition Border Patrol transmitted a stern warning. Human vessels, you are operating in restricted space without authorization. Withdraw immediately or face consequences. Captain Morrison responded for the entire human fleet. The only thing we're doing here is saving lives. If you want to stop us, you'll have to go through us. More Coalition ships began arriving at the system's edge. The Drakmor, a militaristic species that served as the Coalition's enforcers, sent a full battle squadron. They positioned themselves between the human relief ships and deep space, cutting off the evacuation route. Admiral Thompson arrived with Earth's main fleet just as the situation reached a breaking point. Her ships were outnumbered 3-1, but she positioned them between the Coalition forces and the refugee transports. "This is Admiral Claire Thompson of the United Earth Fleet," she broadcast on all channels. "Any interference with humanitarian operations will be considered an act of war." The standoff was tense, but the evacuation continued. Human ships loaded with Cathari refugees ran the Coalition blockade, protected by Earth's military vessels. The galaxy watched in fascination as the youngest species in known space defied the oldest and most powerful organization. But the real test was still to come. The Coalition wasn't going to back down easily, and the Cathari homeworld was still dying. Time was running out, and the humans were about to discover just how far they were willing to go to keep their promise. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Morrison received a message from President Santos herself. "Captain, the whole galaxy is watching. Show them what humanity stands for." The evacuation had been running for 6 days when everything went wrong. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching his tactical displays with growing concern. More Coalition ships were arriving every hour, and they were getting bolder about interfering with the rescue operation. "Sir, the transport ship Mountain View is reporting engine trouble," Lisa Park announced from her communications station. "They're carrying 8,000 Cathari civilians." Jake cursed under his breath. The Mountain View was an old cargo hauler that had volunteered for the mission despite needing major repairs. Captain Roy Davis was pushing his engines far beyond safe limits to help with the evacuation. "Tell them to head for the emergency repair station we set up on the outer moon," Jake ordered, "and get Commander Coleman's Liberty to escort them." Dr. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her science station with disturbing news. "Jake, the planetary infection is spreading faster than we predicted. The crystal network collapse is accelerating." The images from Velthara's surface were heartbreaking. Entire cities were crumbling as the infection spread through the living crystal formations. The beautiful spires that had stood for thousands of years were turning black and falling apart. Cathari families were fleeing the collapsing urban areas, heading for the spaceports in endless streams of refugees. Shothan contacted the Defiance from the planet's surface. His usual calm was cracking under the pressure. "Captain Morrison, we're losing whole districts every hour. The infection is moving too fast." "How many people still need evacuation?" Jake asked. "Nearly 200 million. And our transportation network is failing. People can't reach the spaceports." Jake felt the weight of those numbers. 200 million lives, and time was running out. The human fleet had rescued almost 100 million Cathari in 6 days, which was more than anyone thought possible. But it wasn't enough. That's when Commander Frank Coleman called with worse news. "Captain, we've got a problem. Coalition forces are setting up a blockade around the evacuation routes. They're not shooting yet, but they're making it clear we're not welcome." Jake switched his main screen to show the tactical situation. Dozens of Coalition vessels surrounded the human fleet. The Drakmor battlecruisers were the most threatening, their weapon systems powered but not yet targeting. For now, they seemed content to intimidate rather than attack. Admiral Thompson's voice came over the communication system from her flagship. "All human vessels, maintain current operations. We're not backing down." But the Coalition had other plans. Ambassador Zielka transmitted on all frequencies, his reptilian features cold and threatening. "Attention, human fleet. You are in violation of Coalition sovereignty laws. Your interference in this natural extinction event is disrupting the galactic order." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Natural extinction event? These people are dying from a plague, not evolution. The Cathari have served their purpose in the galactic community. Their resources are better allocated elsewhere. You will cease this illegal evacuation immediately. And if we refuse, then you will face the consequences of defying the coalition. The threat hung in space like a dark cloud. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all young humans, barely into their 20s and 30s, representing a species that had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. They were facing down the most powerful organization in known space. "What do we do, Captain?" asked Ben Hayes from the tactical station. Jake thought about the Cathari families still trapped on the dying world below. He thought about the children in the refugee camps, their crystal-like skin dim with fear and exhaustion. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth, and what kind of galaxy he wanted her to inherit. "We keep working," he said simply. "We came here to save lives, and that's what we're going to do." The standoff continued for hours. Coalition ships positioned themselves to block the evacuation routes while human vessels continued loading refugees. The tension was unbearable, with both sides armed and ready for a fight that nobody really wanted. That's when Dr. Nathan Cross made a discovery that changed everything. The medical ship Sanctuary had been treating Cathari refugees since the evacuation began. Dr. Cross and his team had been studying the plague that was killing their world, hoping to find some way to help. Most of the Cathari medical experts thought the infection was irreversible, but Cross had a different theory. "Jake, you need to hear this," Cross transmitted from the Sanctuary. "I've been working with Cathari scientists, and we think we might be able to reverse the crystal plague." "How?" Jake asked, hope rising in his chest. "The infection is caused by a crystalline virus that disrupts the biocrystal matrix. But if we can introduce the right counteragent, we might be able to heal the damaged crystal formations." Dr. Rodriguez joined the conversation from her science station. "What kind of counteragent? That's the problem. We need rare elements that are only found in Coalition strategic reserves. Quantum-stabilized tritanium and bioreactive platinum. The Coalition has tons of both in their storage facilities." Jake felt his heart sink. "And they'll never give it to us." "Actually, they might have to," Dr. Cross continued. "According to galactic law, any species facing extinction has the right to request emergency medical aid. The Coalition has to provide it if a cure exists." Ambassador Zielka's response to the formal request was predictably cold. "The Coalition does not recognize human medical theories. The Cathari situation is beyond assistance." "But you have the materials we need," Jake argued. "If there's even a chance of saving their world, don't you have an obligation to try?" "The Coalition's obligations are to its member species in good standing. The Cathari account is closed." Jake wanted to punch something. The Coalition had enough rare elements to save Velthera, but they were choosing to let an entire world die, rather than admit they might be wrong about the extinction being irreversible. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been studying the Coalition's own scientific databases, looking for any information about crystal plague infections. What she found changed everything. "Jake, you need to see this. The Coalition has dealt with this exact same plague before, 300 years ago, on a world called Christos Prime. What happened there? They cured it, used the same elements, Dr. Cross identified. But here's the interesting part. Christos Prime was a major supplier of biocrystal technology to the Coalition military. Their cure was classified as a state secret." Jake stared at the data on his screen. "So they know exactly how to save Velthara. They've known all along. They just decided not to use the cure because the Cathari aren't strategically important anymore." The revelation was devastating. The Coalition wasn't just refusing to help. They were actively choosing to let the Cathari die when they had the knowledge and resources to save them. It was genocide disguised as economic policy. Jake made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He opened a communication channel on all frequencies, broadcasting to every ship in the system, every world in Coalition space, and every news network that would listen. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Defiance. I'm broadcasting. From Cathari space, where 300 million innocent people are dying from a plague that the Galactic Coalition knows how to cure. He transmitted all the data Dr. Rodriguez had found, including the Coalition's own records from Christos Prime. The Coalition has the cure. They have the materials. They have the knowledge. They're choosing to let these people die because saving them isn't profitable. The transmission went out across the galaxy and the response was immediate. Within hours, protests erupted on dozens of worlds. Even some Coalition member species began demanding answers from their leadership. But the Coalition's response was swift and brutal. Admiral Kreshvor of the Drakmor fleet powered up his weapons and targeted the human vessels. Captain Morrison, you have violated Coalition security protocols. Surrender immediately or we will open fire. Jake looked at the overwhelming firepower arrayed against his small fleet. The smart thing would be to retreat, to save what lives they could and hope someone else would finish the job. But Jake Morrison hadn't come this far to give up now. Admiral Thompson, this is Morrison. We're not backing down. Claire Thompson's voice came back strong and clear. Copy that, Jake. No one gets left behind. The human fleet formed a defensive line between the Coalition forces and the refugee transports. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't going anywhere. The galaxy held its breath as two fleets faced each other in the darkness between stars, with 300 million innocent lives hanging in the balance. The standoff in Cathari space had lasted 12 hours when the first crack in Coalition unity appeared. Captain Morrison watched his tactical display as a group of ships broke away from the Coalition blockade. They weren't human vessels. They were flying the green and silver colors of the Verdani Republic. Incoming transmission from the Verdani ship Growing Light, Lisa Park announced. Captain, you're going to want to hear this. The face that appeared on screen was distinctly plant-like, with bark-textured skin and leaves instead of hair. Captain, Root Singer of the Growing Light spoke in the melodic tones typical of his species. Captain Morrison, the Verdani Republic formally protests the Coalition's actions in this system. We are withdrawing from the blockade and offering medical supplies to the Cathari refugees. Jake felt a surge of hope. Captain Root Singer, any help would be appreciated. But the Coalition won't be happy about your decision. The Coalition stopped representing our values when they decided to watch children die for economic reasons. We joined this organization to promote peace and cooperation, not to enable genocide. The Verdani ships moved to join the human fleet, their bio-organic hulls gleaming in the light of Velthara's dying sun. It wasn't much, only 6 vessels against the Coalition's massive fleet, but it was a start. Admiral Kreshvor of the Drakmor fleet was furious. Verdani vessels, return to formation immediately. You are in violation of Coalition military protocol. We recognize no protocol that demands we stand by while innocents suffer. Root Singer replied calmly. Our ships will defend the evacuation transports. More cracks began to appear. The aquatic Naya sent a diplomatic message offering their ocean worlds as temporary refugees for Cathari families. The Insectoid Hive Collective, usually silent in Coalition debates, transmitted data about refugee processing that could speed up the evacuation. Dr. Amy Rodriguez monitored the Coalition communication channels and reported increasing discord among their forces. Jake, they're having heated arguments on their military frequencies. Some of their captains are questioning orders. The breakthrough Jake had been hoping for came from an unexpected source, human media coverage. Reporter Alex Chen had been broadcasting live from the evacuation zones for days, and his footage was spreading across the galaxy faster than the Coalition could suppress it. The images were powerful. Cathari children clinging to their parents, as human soldiers carried them to safety. Human medics working alongside Cathari doctors to treat plague victims. Captain Danny Lee of the Phoenix Rising sharing his rations with a group of refugee families who hadn't eaten in days. But the most impactful footage came from Rich Thompson, Alex's cameraman. He had captured the moment when a young Cathari girl, maybe 6 years old, had approached a human Marine named Chris Baker. The child was scared and alone, separated from her family in the chaos of evacuation. Chris had knelt down to the girl's level and offered her a small toy, a stuffed bear from his own daughter back on Earth. The Cathari child had taken the toy and hugged it tight, her crystalline skin flickering with the first light of hope Rich had seen in days. The footage went viral across dozens of species networks. Even on worlds that supported the Coalition's position, people were beginning to question whether economic efficiency was worth watching that little girl die. The political pressure was mounting, but the military standoff remained dangerous. Admiral Kreshvor was under direct orders from Coalition headquarters to stop the human evacuation by any means necessary. His battlecruisers had their weapons locked on human vessels, and Jake knew it would only take one trigger-happy gunner to start a war. That's when Admiral Thompson made a desperate gamble. She opened a channel to Coalition headquarters on the capital world of Nexus Prime, requesting a direct link to the Supreme Council. This is Admiral Claire Thompson of the United Earth Fleet, requesting emergency audience with the Coalition Council under Article 7 of the Galactic Charter. Article 7 hadn't been invoked in over 2 centuries. It allowed any species to demand a hearing on matters of galactic significance, but it also required the petitioning species to accept whatever judgment the Council made. Supreme Counselor Vex 9 appeared on screen, his insect features as cold and calculating as ever. Admiral Thompson, your species is operating outside Coalition authority. You have no standing to invoke Article 7. We're operating under the moral authority. That comes from answering a distress call, Claire replied firmly. But if you want to make this official, let's make it official. I'm formally requesting a council hearing on the Cathari situation. And if the council rules against you, then we'll abide by the decision of the galactic community. But the hearing has to be public, with full media access and testimony from all relevant parties. Vex 9 considered this. A public hearing would put the Coalition's actions under scrutiny, but it would also give them a chance to justify their position and force humanity to back down under official authority. Very well. The hearing will convene in 48 hours on Nexus Prime. Until then, all military operations in this system will be suspended. Admiral Kreshvor was furious. Counselor, my forces are ready to end this situation immediately. Why negotiate with these upstart humans? Because, Admiral, sometimes the best way to win is to let your opponent destroy themselves in public. The temporary ceasefire gave both sides time to prepare their cases. Jake worked with Dr. Cross and Dr. Rodriguez to compile evidence of the Coalition's deliberate negligence. They had proof that the cure existed, proof that the Coalition had used it before, and proof that they were choosing to let the Cathari die for purely economic reasons. But they also knew the political reality. The Coalition Council was dominated by the older, more established species. Humanity was still seen as young and naive, too emotional to understand the hard realities of galactic governance. During the ceasefire, something remarkable happened. The evacuation continued, but now it was supported by ships from a dozen different species. The Verdani brought their medical vessels. The Naya sent transport ships designed for aquatic species, but perfectly capable of carrying refugees. Even, some individual Coalition captains began experiencing technical difficulties that prevented them from stopping human rescue ships. Captain Morrison used the time to visit Velthara's surface personally. He wanted to see the situation firsthand before testifying at the hearing. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Cathari cities were beautiful even in their death. The crystal spires caught and refracted light in ways that created rainbows even as they crumbled. Cathari families moved through the ruins with quiet dignity, salvaging what they could of their ancient culture before fleeing to the spaceports. Shathan met Jake at the largest refugee camp. The Cathari leader looked exhausted, his natural luminescence dim with grief and stress. Captain Morrison, I want to thank your species for what you've done. Even if the Council rules against us, at least we know someone cared enough to try. Jake looked out over the camp, where hundreds of thousands of Cathari waited for transport to safety. Human volunteers worked alongside Cathari organizers, using translation software and gestures to coordinate relief efforts. We're not done yet, Jake told Shathan. The hearing might change everything. And if it doesn't? Jake met the alien leader's eyes. then we'll find another way. That's what humans do when we make a promise. The day before the council hearing, Dr. Cross made another breakthrough. Working with Cathari scientists, he had developed a prototype cure for the crystal plague using synthetic alternatives to the rare elements the Coalition was withholding. It's not as effective as the real thing, Cross explained over subspace communication, but it might slow the infection enough to buy us more time. Jake felt a glimmer of hope. If they could prove the cure worked, even partially, it would strengthen their case at the hearing, but the Coalition wasn't going to make things easy. As the human delegation prepared to depart for Nexus Prime, Admiral Kreshvor transmitted one final warning. Enjoy your moment of attention, humans. Tomorrow the Council will remind you of your place in the Galactic Order, and then we'll finish what should have been done days ago. Jake Morrison looked out at the dying world of Velthera and the millions of people still waiting for rescue. Tomorrow, in front of the entire galaxy, humanity would make its case for why some things mattered more than profit margins and economic efficiency. The future of the Cathari people, and perhaps the soul of the galaxy itself, would be decided by words instead of weapons. Jake just hoped that words would be enough. The Great Council chamber on Nexus Prime had never seen anything like it. Representatives from over 300 species filled the massive amphitheater, while billions more watched through live broadcasts across the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the center of it all, representing not just humanity but the idea that some things were more important than politics and profit. Supreme Counselor Vex 9 presided over the hearing with cold efficiency. His insect-like features showed no emotion as he called the session to order. This emergency session will determine the fate of Coalition intervention in the Cathari extinction event. The human delegation claims that the Coalition has violated its own principles by refusing to render aid. The Coalition maintains that the humans have interfered with the natural evolutionary process. Jake looked around the chamber at the faces of dozens of species. Some, like the Verdani and Naya, looked supportive. Others, particularly the older Coalition founding members, watched him with barely concealed hostility. The Drakmor delegation sat in their war-scarred armor, clearly hoping this would end in military action. Captain Morrison, Vex 9 continued, present your case. Jake stepped forward, his voice carrying across the vast chamber through translation systems. He had rehearsed this speech for hours, but now, faced with the weight of 300 million lives, the words came from his heart. Honored delegates, 5 days ago, the Coalition made a decision that will define us for generations. They chose to watch an entire species die rather than spend resources to save them. This wasn't a natural disaster or evolutionary pressure. This was abandonment. He activated a holographic display showing the data Dr. Rodriguez had uncovered. The Coalition has dealt with Crystal Plague before. 300 years ago on Christos Prime, they developed and deployed a cure. They saved that world because it served their military interests. The Cathari world doesn't serve those interests, so they chose to let it die. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Many delegates were seeing this information for the first time. Admiral Kreshvor stood to respond. The humans present classified information obtained through illegal espionage. More importantly, they fail to understand basic resource allocation. The Coalition cannot save every species that faces extinction. We must prioritize our efforts based on strategic value and probable success rates. Strategic value? Jake's voice rose with barely controlled anger. We're talking about children, families, people who have been loyal members of this Coalition for 3 centuries. We are talking about efficiency, Kreshvor replied coldly. The galaxy is vast and dangerous. Resources spent on lost causes cannot be used to protect viable civilizations. This is the hard reality of galactic governance that humans in their youth and naivety fail to grasp. Jake had expected this argument, but hearing it stated so bluntly still shocked him. Around the chamber, he could see other delegates shifting, uncomfortably. The mask was coming off the Coalition's carefully maintained image of benevolent leadership. That's when Sha Then stepped forward. The Cathari leader had requested permission to address the council, and his presence brought a hush to the great chamber. Honored delegates, I am Shathan, speaker for the Cathari people. I have served the Coalition faithfully for 40 years. I have seen our biocrystal technology save lives across dozens of worlds. I have watched our artists bring beauty to the darkest corners of space. His voice carried the musical quality of his species, translated but still hauntingly beautiful. 5 days ago, we sent a distress call to every Coalition member world. We begged for help as our civilization crumbled around us. The response was silence. Shathan turned to look directly at Jake. Then came the humans. They had no obligation to help us. We had barely spoken to their species before. But when they heard our call for help, they came, not because we could offer them anything in return, but because we needed help. He faced the council again. The Coalition taught us that civilization was built on cooperation and mutual support. The humans showed us what those words actually mean. The chamber erupted in debate. Delegates argued in dozens of languages while translation systems struggled to keep up. Jake watched nervously as the older Coalition species tried to maintain control, while younger members demanded answers. That's when Captain Rootsinger of the Verdani stood to address the chamber. The Verdani Republic formally withdraws from Coalition military operations pending a full review of intervention policies. We will not be part of an organization that watches genocide and calls it efficiency. The Naya delegation followed immediately. The Naya collective joins the Verdani. Protest. Our ships will continue supporting refugee operations regardless of this body's decision. More species began standing and announcing their withdrawal from Coalition military cooperation. Jake realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The most powerful organization in galactic history was fracturing over the principle of helping those in need. Supreme Counselor Vex 9 called for order, but the damage was done. The unity the Coalition depended on was breaking apart, and everyone could see it happening. Dr. Nathan Cross chose that moment to make his announcement. Honored delegates, while this debate has continued, Cathari and human scientists have successfully tested a synthetic cure for the crystal plague. We don't need Coalition resources anymore. We can save Velthara ourselves. The chamber fell silent. Cross activated his own holographic display, showing before and after images of crystal formations. Treated with the synthetic cure, the black infection was visibly receding, replaced by healthy, glowing crystal growth. The cure works, Cross continued. It's not as fast or efficient as the original Coalition formula, but it will save the Cathari homeworld. The evacuation can become a return home instead of permanent exile. Admiral Kreshvor was furious. This is exactly the kind of reckless experimentation that led to the plague in the first place. The humans are playing with forces they don't understand. The humans are saving lives while you debate whether those lives are worth saving, Shathan replied with quiet dignity. Jake felt the momentum of the hearing shift. The Coalition's argument had been based on the impossibility of helping the Cathari. Now that help was not only possible but already working, their position looked petty and cruel. Vex 9 tried to regain control. Even if this synthetic cure proves effective, the humans have violated Coalition sovereignty and military protocols. They must be sanctioned for their interference. But the chamber was no longer listening to the Coalition leadership. Delegate after delegate stood to praise the human rescue efforts and condemn the Coalition's abandonment of the Cathari. The careful political order that had governed the galaxy for centuries was crumbling before Jake's eyes. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Telray of the Zephyrian Empire, one of the Coalition's founding members, rose to address the chamber. The Zephyrian Empire has been part of the Coalition since its inception 800 years ago. We helped write the charter that promised mutual aid and support to all member species. Today, we have seen that charter violated in the most fundamental way possible. Telray's words carried the weight of centuries of tradition and authority. The Empire formally calls for the dissolution of the current Coalition leadership and the establishment of a new galactic organization based on the principles the humans have demonstrated, that all sentient life has value, and that we are strongest when we stand together. The chamber erupted again, but this time with cheers and applause. The vote, when it finally came, was overwhelming. The Coalition as it had existed was finished. In its place would come something new, something built on compassion rather than cold calculation. 3 months later, Jake Morrison stood in the rebuilt crystal gardens of Velthara, watching Cathari children play among the healing formations. The synthetic cure had worked better than anyone hoped, not only stopping the plague but actually strengthening the planet's crystal network. Shathan approached, his natural luminescence brighter than Jake had ever seen it. "Captain Morrison, I wanted to show you something." He led Jake to a new crystal formation growing in the center of the garden. It was different from traditional Cathari architecture, more angular, more purposeful. Carved into its base were words in both Cathari, script and human languages. "We're with you always," Jake read aloud. "It's the motto of the new alliance," Shathan explained, "suggested by one of our young people who survived the evacuation. She said it captured what your species taught us about true civilization." Jake looked around at the thriving city. Humans and Cathari worked side by side on reconstruction projects. Children from both species played together in the crystal gardens. It was a living symbol of what the galaxy could become. "The Alliance is growing every day," Shathan continued. 47 species have joined so far, with more applying each week. They all want to be part of something based on helping rather than controlling. Jake smiled as he watched a human child and a young Cathari teaching each other their respective languages through laughter and gestures. It's not about species or politics or economic value. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.